There's a moment in life that most people try to ignore, not because they don't see it, but because once you truly recognize it, you can't go back to who you were before. It doesn't arrive loudly. There's no clear event, no dramatic turning point. It creeps in quietly, usually at night, or in those brief pauses between distractions, when there's nothing left to consume, nothing left to scroll, nothing left to escape into. And for a second, just a second, you become aware. Aware of your own life, not as something you're controlling, but as something that is slowly slipping through your hands. You start to notice patterns, how your days repeat themselves with small variations that don't really change anything. How your thoughts feel familiar, almost rehearsed as if you've been thinking the same things for years. How your reactions, your habits, even your goals start to feel less like choices and more like loops. And that's when the uncomfortable question appears: if nothing changes, will anything ever change? Most people don't stay in that question for long. They distract themselves. They reassure themselves. They tell themselves there's still time. But deep down, something feels off. Because time doesn't announce what it's taking from you. It doesn't warn you when a version of your life quietly expires. It just moves. Indifferent, constant, unstoppable. And while you're busy trying to figure things out, it keeps going. The truth is, and this is where it becomes dangerous, you can spend years being almost ready, almost disciplined, almost confident, almost the person you know you could become. And from the outside, it looks like you're progressing. But internally, as nothing fundamental has shifted, you're still operating from the same identity, the same fears, the same unconscious patterns. And until that changes, nothing else truly will. Most people believe they are in control of their lives. Not completely, of course, but enough to feel responsible for where they are and where they're going. They believe their decisions are conscious, that their goals are chosen, that their direction is intentional. But if you slow down and really observe yourself, something unsettling starts to appear. You don't choose most of what you do. You repeat it. You wake up at the same time, follow the same mental scripts, react in the same ways to the same situations. Even your thoughts, the ones you think are yours, tend to follow familiar paths. You worry about the same things. You hesitate at the same moments. You tell yourself the same internal stories about who you are and what you're capable of. And over time, those patterns become invisible. Not because they disappear, but because they become you. This is where the illusion begins. Because when something is repeated long enough, it no longer feels like a pattern. It feels like identity. I'm just not that confident. I've always been like this. This is just how I am. But that's not truth. That's conditioning that went unquestioned for too long. And the real danger isn't that you have patterns. Everyone does. The real danger is living inside them without ever realizing it. Because once a pattern becomes identity, you stop trying to change it. You start protecting it. You justify it. You defend it. You build your life around it. And slowly, without noticing, you adapt to a version of yourself that was never consciously chosen. A version shaped by repetition, not intention. And from that place, even your efforts to change become limited. Because you're trying to create a different life from the same internal structure that created the current one. And that almost never works. Once you begin to understand that most of your behavior is patterned, something even more uncomfortable starts to emerge. Other people can feel it, not consciously, not in a way they could explain, but they respond to it anyway. Because human interaction is not built on what you say. It's built on what you transmit. Every time you speak, hesitate, react, or even stay silent, you are constantly signaling something. Not just through your words, but through your certainty, your timing, your presence. And people read those signals instantly. They don't sit there analyzing you logically. They don't need to. Your behavior tells them everything they need to know. It tells them where you place yourself in the invisible hierarchy of value. And here's the part most people never realize. The world does not treat you based on your potential. It treats you based on your positioning. If your words seek validation, people feel it. If your tone carries doubt, people register it. If your presence asks for permission, people respond accordingly, and it happens fast, faster than logic, faster than conscious thought. That's why you've seen it before. Someone walks into a room and doesn't say much, but somehow commands attention. Not because they're louder, not because they're trying harder, but because nothing in them is asking to be accepted. There's no underlying neediness, no subtle negotiation for approval, and that absence is power. Meanwhile, someone else might say all the right things, do all the right actions, but something feels off, because beneath the surface there's tension, an effort to be liked, an effort to be validated, an effort to be enough. And people feel that too. Even if they don't understand why, they respond differently. Respect, attention, influence, none of these are given based on effort alone. They are responses to signals. And most people are sending the wrong one all the time. At this point, you might think the solution is simple. Just change the pattern. Just act differently. Just become more confident. But if it were that easy, you would have already done it. Because the problem isn't awareness, it's attachment. You're not just repeating patterns, you're protecting them. Every behavior you have, even the ones that limit you, serves a purpose. Not a logical one, not a conscious one, but a psychological one. Your hesitation protects you from rejection. Your self-doubt protects you from failure. Your need for validation protects you from being ignored. And over time, those protections become part of your structure. They create a version of you that feels safe, predictable, manageable, controlled. But safety comes at a cost, because the same mechanisms that protect you also limit you. They keep you from speaking when you should speak, from acting when you should act, from stepping forward when everything in you says wait. And here's where it becomes dangerous. You start confusing comfort with truth. You assume that because something feels natural, it must be who you are. But most of what feels natural is just what you've repeated the most. It's familiarity, not identity. And familiarity has a powerful pull. It keeps you inside known boundaries. It keeps your behavior consistent. It keeps your life predictable, even when that predictability is exactly what's keeping you stuck. So you try to change, but only within the limits of what feels comfortable. You adjust slightly. You improve marginally. You stay within the same psychological frame. And then you wonder why nothing really shifts, because real change doesn't happen inside the same structure. It requires breaking the one that created your current reality. And most people never go that far. At some point, everyone becomes aware that something in their life isn't working. They feel stuck. They feel behind. They feel like they're capable of more, but somehow never fully access it. And in that moment, most people make the same decision. They try to improve, they read more, they watch more. They learn new strategies, new systems, new ways of thinking. From the outside, it looks like progress. And for a while, it even feels like it. But then something strange happens. Despite all the effort, all the information, all the intention, they slowly drift back into the same patterns, the same reactions, the same doubts, the same limitations, and eventually they reach a quiet conclusion. Maybe this is just who I am. But that's not the truth. The truth is much harder to accept. Most people don't fail because they lack knowledge. They fail because they never question the identity that is using that knowledge. They try to build a new life without dismantling the version of themselves that created the current one. And that creates a hidden conflict, because no matter how powerful the strategy is, it will always be filtered through the same internal structure. The same fears will reinterpret it, the same doubts will weaken it, the same patterns will reshape it, until it becomes something familiar again, something safe again, something that fits inside the identity they never challenged. And that's why some people break free and others don't. It's not about discipline, it's not about intelligence. It's about whether you're willing to confront the version of yourself you've been unconsciously maintaining. Because real change doesn't come from adding more. It comes from removing what was never truly you. There is a moment, and it doesn't happen to everyone, where something shifts. Not externally, nothing changes around you. But internally, something clicks. You begin to see that the person you've been operating as isn't fixed. It's constructed, layer by layer, through repetition, through experiences, through interpretations you never consciously chose. And once you truly understand that, something powerful happens. You stop asking, "Why am I like this?" And you start asking a different question. What has been shaping me into this? Because that question removes the illusion that your identity is permanent. It reveals something most people never fully grasp. You were not born with most of what you call yourself. Your fears were learned, your limits were reinforced, your behaviors were repeated until they felt automatic. And if something was built, it can be rebuilt. But this is where most people hesitate, because the idea of changing sounds exciting until you realize what it actually requires. It means letting go of familiar reactions, letting go of predictable behaviors, letting go of the version of you that, despite its flaws, feels known. And the unknown is uncomfortable, even when it holds something better. So the mind resists. It tells you to wait, to prepare more, to become ready. But readiness is often just another delay. Because the truth is, you don't transform by thinking differently. You transform by interrupting what has been repeated, by acting in ways that feel unfamiliar, by holding positions that your old identity would avoid, by refusing to return to patterns that once defined you. And at first it feels unnatural, almost wrong. But that discomfort isn't a sign you're failing. It's a sign you're no longer operating on autopilot. The moment you begin to interrupt your old patterns, something subtle starts to change. At first, it's almost imperceptible. Nothing dramatic happens overnight. No sudden transformation, no instant validation. But there is a shift, and it starts in the way you carry yourself. You hesitate less. You explain less. You stop trying to manage how others perceive you and start focusing on how you position yourself. And that changes everything. Because people are constantly reading you. Not just your words, but your certainty. Not just your actions, but your underlying state. And when that state changes, their response changes with it. You may notice that conversations feel different. People interrupt you less. They listen a little more closely. They take a second longer before responding. Not because you demanded respect, but because you stopped signaling that you lacked it. There's less urgency in how you speak, less need to prove something, less hidden tension behind your words. And that absence creates presence. You're no longer negotiating your value in real time. You're expressing it. And that creates a different dynamic, because when you don't seek validation, you become harder to ignore. When you don't rush to be understood, people lean in to understand you. When you don't try to be accepted, you shift the frame entirely. You're no longer asking to be included. You're defining the terms of interaction. And this is where power becomes visible. Not loud, not aggressive, not forced, but stable. And stability is something people instinctively respect, because most individuals are internally unstable, driven by reaction, driven by approval, driven by external feedback. So when someone operates from a place that isn't constantly shifting, it stands out, and the world responds to that. At this stage, everything might seem clear. You understand the patterns, you see how identity is formed, you recognize how the world responds to what you project. And for a moment, it feels like you've unlocked something. But this is exactly where most people lose it. Not because they don't understand, but because understanding doesn't compete with habit. There's a difference between seeing the truth and being able to live it consistently. Because the moment you step outside your old patterns, something happens. Friction, internal resistance, emotional discomfort, a subtle pull back toward what feels familiar. And it doesn't feel like self-sabotage, it feels like relief. Relief in going back to what you know, relief in thinking the way you've always thought, relief in behaving the way that requires less effort. And slowly, almost invisibly, you return. Not all at once, but in small ways. You hesitate again when you should act. You overthink when you should move. You adjust yourself to be accepted, instead of holding your position. And because the change wasn't fully integrated, the old identity reclaims its place. That's why so many people have moments of clarity, but never a lasting shift. Because clarity without repetition fades, insight without action dissolves. And the mind always defaults to what has been reinforced the most. So if you've spent years thinking, reacting and behaving in a certain way, a few moments of awareness won't override that. It takes something more deliberate, more consistent, more uncomfortable. And this is the part no one talks about. Transformation isn't a breakthrough, it's a confrontation, repeated daily. At some point, after all the awareness, all the reflection, all the moments where things start to make sense, you arrive at a decision, not a loud one, not a dramatic turning point, but a quiet, internal line that gets drawn. Because now you see it. You see the patterns, you see the identity you've been operating from, you see how it shapes your behavior, and how your behavior shapes your reality. And from this point forward, something changes. You can no longer pretend you don't know. You can't go back to blaming circumstances in the same way. You can't fully believe the same excuses. You can't ignore the moments where you choose comfort over growth, because now you're aware. And awareness creates responsibility. Not in a motivational sense, not in a you should do better kind of way, but in a much more direct, almost uncomfortable way. Every action becomes a choice, not between easy and hard, but between familiar and intentional, between repeating what you've always been or stepping into something that still feels uncertain. And this is where most people hesitate, because the cost becomes clear. To move forward, you don't just have to act differently. You have to let parts of your current identity fall away. The version of you that hesitates, the version that seeks approval, the version that avoids discomfort. And even if those parts limit you, they're still familiar. And letting go of something familiar, even if it's holding you back, feels like losing something. So people pause here, they think more, they wait more, they tell themselves they'll start soon. But there is no clean transition, no perfect moment where everything feels aligned. There is only the decision and what you do after it. There's a point where thinking stops being useful, not because thinking is wrong, but because you've already thought enough. You've analyzed, you've reflected, you've understood patterns, behaviors, identity, perception, and now continuing to think is no longer progress. It's avoidance, because what stands in front of you now isn't confusion, it's execution. And execution is where everything becomes real. This is where your actions begin to contradict your old identity, or reinforce it. Not in big dramatic moves, but in small, precise moments. In whether you speak when you feel the impulse to stay quiet. In whether you hold your position when the instinct is to adjust. In whether you act without waiting to feel ready. These moments don't look significant from the outside. No one applauds them. No one notices them immediately. But they accumulate. And over time, they begin to reshape something deeper than behavior. They reshape your baseline, the way you think, the way you respond, the way you exist in the world. And once that baseline shifts, everything built on top of it changes naturally. Not forced, not performed, not simulated, real. But this only happens if you stop negotiating with yourself, if you stop waiting for the right mood, the right timing, the right version of you to appear. Because that version doesn't arrive first. It's created through what you do next. So the question is no longer, do you understand? You do. The question is, will you continue operating from what's familiar? Or will you begin reinforcing something different, even when it feels uncomfortable, uncertain, and unseen? Because in the end, your life won't be defined by what you realize today. It will be defined by what you repeated after it.